Okay, yeah. So I just launched it, and basically it's going to be, well, so there's a lot of podcast courses out there, but they cover the gamut. It can be overwhelming and they're expensive.
Yeah. Martians landed.
Yes.
Wearing Prada suits.
Yes.
Drinking Henry Seltzer.
Yes.
Chewing juicy fruit.
Yes, and?
Your branding here.
Yes, brand.
Your message here.
Yes, and?
A verse about
Yes.
your product here.
Yes.
I'm Hirsch Redfin.
Yes, and?
I'm a message therapist.
Yes.
And I have a podcast.
Yes, brand.
That's right, that's it.
Yes.
We'll help you fix the world.
Yes.
Or your bottom line.
All right.
Your bottom line.
Get it. I get it. Welcome to the Yes Brand Podcast.
All right. We are going to have fun today. This is the Yes Brand Podcast. And in the hot seat today is Sarah St. John. Sarah is founder and CEO of the PodPlanet.com, which is a podcast production company, PodLab.pro, which provides education courses for podcasting, and then is the host of Frugalpreneur, Building a Business on a Bootstrap Budget, the podcast. And so as you can tell, this podcast episode is going to be about all things podcast. And it's also fitting in with our new direction for season 3, which has a lot to do with how business people use the skills and tools that they've developed for progressing their own brand to help other people do the same for theirs. So Sarah, welcome to Yes Brand.
Well, thanks so much for having me. I appreciate it.
It's my pleasure to have you. All right. So the thing that caught my eye first and foremost was Frugalpreneur. It just has a great ring to it, but it also makes a lot of sense because people who are starting their own business, people who are doing their own business, it all comes down to them. The buck stops with them, and it isn't a cheap endeavor to get a business off the ground. How did you come up with that, and what inspired you to do that podcast?
Yeah. So, my entrepreneur journey started back in 2008. I had 6 different jobs that year, not at the same time, but throughout the course of the year. Realized I wanted to start working for myself. And so I started a photography business doing like weddings and portraits, but it was just becoming expensive to maintain the equipment, the lighting, the software, the driving around to events. So I decided I wanted to switch to an online business model, but wasn't sure what I wanted to do. So I tried like blogging, affiliate marketing, drop shipping. And it was through this process that I decided to write a book called Frugalpreneur to talk about the different types of ways to make money online or online business models and how to run them on a budget. So then I decided to launch the podcast, also called Frugalpreneur, to coincide with the book as an extra marketing avenue. But I got more leverage and traction with the podcast than the book. I love the networking and connections I was making. It was originally only going to be a few episodes, but I've now been doing the podcast for 4 years now, and I just love the industry so much. So now I have a podcast production agency and teach and coach and all this stuff. But yeah, so that's kind of I tried a million different things for over a decade to get to podcasting.
Yeah, and my story is, like business-wise different, but very similar in that when I happened upon podcasting, I put a lot of time and effort into learning how to do it, put things together. And, I was very meticulous and dedicated about that. I think the pandemic had something to do with it because there was an opportunity to slow things down a little bit and learn a little bit. It was like there wasn't a hurry up feeling because we were all in flux. So it was like, okay, I'm gonna focus on this and really work at it. But it also took off pretty quickly and felt like, yeah, the people that are doing this are really great people. They're they're like minds. They're like, they're curious. They are ambitious, but they are very heart-centered in most cases. And so I found it to be a great industry. So for the Pod Planet, what do you provide for your clients?
Yeah, so I found that one of the big obstacles with people getting into podcasting is it's not so much the recording that's the issue, it's all the post-production.
Yeah.
And like people don't realize all that goes into it. And so basically when someone records an episode, they just send me the episode and then I take care of all the post-production, like the editing, removing filler words, making sure it all sounds right and level, creating show notes and episode graphics, even like the transcript, and then different like social copy basically to go with the social image and all of that kind of thing, so that all they have to do is just show up and record their podcast.
Right. And some of those things are changing. The different assets have evolved even in the short time that I've been doing it. Obviously, AI is now a part of the conversation. What is that? What has your experience been with that so far?
Yeah, so that definitely saves a lot of time. And like, for example, so like when I edit podcasts, I use Descript. And I find what I like about Descript and what I find helps speed the process along is that I can edit the audio and even the video from editing the transcript. So I can remove filler words within a click of a button. And then there's like Cast Magic or Cap Show, where it can create show notes, transcripts, social media posts, and all this kind of thing. So it's you can streamline the process, do it a lot quicker than you used to be able to. So yeah, I think, and that's also why I'm able to offer like my services for such a low price, because I use AI to help with that process, so it doesn't take nearly as long and whatnot. But yeah.
Right. And you pass that on to the client, as a savings. And I think for that, in that sense, it's great. We talk a lot, obviously, about brand and about image, and how important is the content, these assets that are created, and I do it myself. But I think what happens sometimes is we just get into we're just doing it. We're just creating it. We're like, it's like a machine. We're putting it out. But how important are these assets and what you say about an episode or what you say about the guest? Some people just paste the bio. Some, how does the branding of a podcaster fit into all of this?
Yeah, so I mean, back in the day, and by that I mean like 2 years ago,
right? In ancient history, early in the history of our world, yeah.
Audiograms were kind of a thing, but now that's so instead of that. Oh, well, let me explain what that is in case people don't know. But basically, it's the audio of your podcast, like a little clip set to, there's like a static image, and so it has just like a waveform or whatever, and those did okay for a while, but now they don't do so good. So now videograms, I don't know if that's the technical term, but that's what I call them, where it's the actual video clip of you and the guest, and there's a transcript kind of going along with it as you're speaking, so that if someone is watching it at work or something and they don't want the sound on, they can still read it. But that does a lot better than audiograms. And then it's important, to have your branding on there. One podcast actually that just came out, so I'm doing kind of a shout out or a plug for, I don't know if you know Larry Roberts.
Oh, yes.
The redhead guy. Yeah. And then Sarah Losi, they started a podcast together called Branded. And what I like about their clips, their little social media clips, is that it has like their logo and like it's very branded, I guess.
Yeah, it is branded. Well, it is branded. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. So I really love that. Yeah. And then as far as, I think tagging the guest is important, so that they're notified that, and then maybe they can just retweet it or although it's called X now, right? So re-exit. I don't
Well,
know.
is it called X or is it just that the logo is X? I
Oh,
think it's
maybe.
called, and I've heard people refer to it. I heard somebody as recently as an interview I was doing earlier, refer to it as X, but I believe that it's still Twitter. It's
Oh,
just
okay.
now. That's what I think. I don't know. The whole thing is very random. It seems
Yeah.
it's
And
very
like
random to me.
when I go to my Twitter, I don't see the X anywhere. It's like only certain people are seeing that or something, or it's
Well,
a
I
slow
see it.
rollout.
I see it as if I go to at Twitter, if I put in Twitter's actual handle at Twitter, it's
Uh-huh.
now got the X on it, but it's still called at
Oh.
Twitter. It's not
Oh,
called
okay.
at X or anything like that.
Uh,
But it's an interesting thing to consider because you have these enormous brands, and I've been in the brand voice business for a long time. How they talk about themselves, how they present themselves, big brands, small brands. And it's amazing sometimes the risks that they'll take, to shake up something that, I mean, now Twitter, I wouldn't say it's not broken. It's kind of an upheaval, but certainly the logo's not the problem. But what's at stake is considerable, I guess, when it comes to the equity of a brand. You have this frugalpreneur brand for your show, but PodPlanet and PodLab Pro are much more kind of agnostic, theme agnostic. It's not about a specific, your personal brand point of view. So
mhm.
what are you doing to kind of differentiate the two so that you're marketing Frugalpreneur as a show, as a brand, and you're also marketing the other two companies as brands?
Yeah, and I'm finding that to be kind of a challenge because I would
Sure.
like for everything I do to like kind of cross promote or like cross,
Yeah.
I mean, PodPlanet and PodLab Pro, I mean, those are fine together, but with the
Right.
podcast, so I was actually thinking this today. It's not the first time I've thought of it, but if I need to start yet another podcast about podcasting to help basically market my podcast businesses, because I mean, I can talk about them on the Frugalpreneur or whatever, but I don't know, because Frugalpreneur is more like any kind of basically
Any kind
online
of business.
business.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I had this, Sarah, I had this very problem because I started, my first podcast was Truth Tastes Funny. That's very much a general, human interest podcast about surviving and thriving in a crazy world. And the thing I found was, well, it doesn't do anything to promote my business as a copywriter. It doesn't. What am I supposed to do? Like take a break and say, hey, and just a word if you need copywriting, please. There's nothing about it. It wasn't have anything to do with it. And that's why I started Yes Brand as a podcast. Yes Brand being actually a new company that I started for brand development and messaging and copywriting and everything. But it was much easier to promote myself as a copywriter and as a brand expert than I was doing on Truth Tastes Funny, where, I could have a pastor from a church who works with people who were battling addiction. That doesn't have anything to do with, with brand building per se. So I just did start that separate podcast to differentiate between the two things. But to your point about unification, there might be a way to unify. I mean, Frugalpreneur stands alone on its own as an example of a successful podcast. So it isn't, the subject matter is not really the point. It's still a case study for what you do and your techniques. But what I did was Truth Tastes Funny is about how the truth can be kind of ridiculous. And Yes Brand is about selling the truth. So the idea of truth in advertising or truth in your brand or your core value, that's still part of my personal brand. So I think that, there's always going to be some crossover. But
Yeah.
I see what you're saying about it's funny that PodPlanet and PodLab Pro don't have a podcast. Is kind of what you're. Yeah.
So yeah, I'm thinking either launching a podcast for those, because with Frugalpreneur, I don't actually have really anything on like the way I monetize that show is the occasional sponsor or through affiliate marketing or whatever. But other than that, there's no like course or any of that kind of thing.
Right.
Although maybe there
Right.
should be, but I mean, I have books, but that's it. And so I'm thinking either I need to start a new podcast. It's still keep Frugalpreneur, of course, but start a new one
Right.
for my podcast businesses. Or another thought I had, I don't know, this might be a stretch, is to keep Frugalpreneur, but like, the tagline is building a business on a bootstrap budget. But maybe it could be like building a business on a bootstrap budget through the power of podcasting. I mean, that's really long, but somehow tie in podcasting to how you could be a frugalpreneur, like leverage podcasts as the way to be a frugalpreneur. I don't know.
I think that's too limiting. I think that forces it a little. What did come to mind was that if you wanted to, there's two things that come to mind. One is that either PodPlanet as a podcast could be a launching pad for up and coming or aspiring podcasters. So in other words, it's a real podcast, but you have, and maybe that's where it's tied with PodLab Pro. PodPlanet, or not even PodPlanet, PodLab Pro. Let's take that one. PodLab Pro is a podcast where people come on to become better at podcasting. And so it's executive produced by you, but it's hosted by different people. And I don't know everything that's out there, but I don't know if there's anything in particular that's out there where the show exists to help people learn to become better podcasters. There are shows about being better podcaster, and that person is usually and if you had one like that, you would have to be competing with all those other people who are podcasting professionals who, have shows about what they do. And I know from having friends in that situation that that's challenging too, because every week you're being on some other expert or some podcast or some guest or it doesn't lend itself so readily to a really fascinating podcast. But the other benefit of this is you have somebody come on who maybe their podcast is about firefighters, right? That's what they want to do, but they're a student of yours and they're a client of yours and they're learning stuff. And so they get, as part of, a package or whatever, they get to guest on podcast on PodLab Pros or something like that. And they come on and they do the opposite. You might think that they would come on and be interviewed by you or whatever, but they actually come on and get to interview someone, a guest. So now you're serving serving a guest, you're serving them as giving them experience hosting. It would be a good reason to start a podcast, because I agree with you, Sarah, that there's a gap between what those companies do and the fact that they're related to podcasting but aren't represented by a podcast. But and then of course it would be easy enough to promote podplanet.com within PodPros, because you could do your own ads there.
Yeah.
Hi, this is Sarah St. John. I'm the executive producer of PodLab Pro and the host of Frugalpreneur. I just wanted to mention PodLab Planet. I'm really excited to blank. And so
interesting. So you're saying, because initially when you started talking, I thought you meant like bring on podcasting experts to kind of have solo episodes, but using my platform. But then I guess what you're saying is actually have students.
Yeah.
As they do like one episode where they're the host and they're interviewing, say, a podcast expert or something.
Well, they could be interviewing anybody. In other words, the show itself, and this is the other kind of a interesting part, and because I'm thinking of this as we're talking, it's like there could be like some, it may not be the most clear, pristine idea yet, but rather than have to constantly, drop wisdom or interview experts or whatever, make the whole podcast about podcasting, the show is really about podcasting because they're learning how to do it. And they're bound to say, oh, I'm pretty new at this. I'm doing this thing. It's part of the PodLab Pros thing. But the guest can be, somebody who's a bioresearch person. They don't have to be a podcaster. They're getting the benefit of being on this show that's known for taking chances, putting interesting people out there. Ultimately, it serves to promote whoever the guest is, whoever the host is, and you. And anything new, any idea that hasn't been done before comes with a little bit of like trepidation, like, well, okay, well, but the good news is, we don't have to go from this conversation to like, okay, let's start recording, hit record.
Yeah.
But it just came to mind because at PodLab Pro just spoke to me as something that's going to help people learn podcasting and be good at it. And what I tell clients about my ideas is take whatever I said to you and simplify it. because I probably included in there some component that you don't need. That's how I think. I overwrite in which every writer does, but I do it on the air. So it's like, there's nothing I can do about it. But as a writer, even as a comedian, when I do stand up, I overwrite and then I have to whittle it down. I edit it down. And eventually it becomes a really nice, tight piece of writing. But I do like the idea of something like that. I think that would be fun. And it would help those people, those hosts, kind of cut their teeth on what they're trying to do. One of the things that I recall is I remember more than one person telling me, well, your first 5 episodes are going to be terrible. Your first, as a podcaster, the first 5 episodes you do are going to probably be garbage and, whatever, just learn from it. And that doesn't have to be true. It's fair warning to people who are new behind the mic, but it certainly is, it has a boldness to it. That's my 2 cents, an unplanned kind of reaction.
This is like almost like a coaching call mastermind situation
right.
within an interview.
Right. Which is funny because I don't coach, although maybe yet. I don't know. I let me ask you this. Talk to me about coaching and your style, and talk to me actually a little bit about PodLab.
Okay, yeah. So I just launched it, and basically it's going to be, there's a lot of podcast courses out there, but they cover the gamut. It can be overwhelming and they're expensive.
Yeah.
Like, some of them are $500 and beyond. So what I wanted to do was create something where I have courses, but they're like on one particular type of software or one particular concept or whatever, all related to podcasting, but then only charge like somewhere between $9 and $49, depending on what it is. And the course being like 30 minutes to an hour, like bite-sized courses. But then in addition, so that, so it's a la carte, but then there's the membership plan where you can get all the courses plus group coaching as well. So yeah, that's basically the concept. Is there's kind of like 2 different models. There's the a la carte for just the courses. Then there's the monthly for unlimited courses plus the coaching, the group coaching for like $97 a month. So basically, Yeah. So, and the courses are going to be like drip fed because I have like 50 something, I don't know, plans, different course.
Uh-huh.
So, and of course, they're not all done. I'm just kind of starting that process. So, yeah, kind of drip fed until they're all out there.
Right, right. Well, so how do you have like an email list that you have maybe warm, like some warm contacts on there, or people who listen to the show, or people who have appeared on the show, or students? Tell me about your audience, so to speak, your following for your brands.
Yeah, well, for that, so you're talking about for Frugalpreneur?
Well, for everything, like,
Oh,
because
okay.
yeah.
Yeah, so I do have an email list, and I send out emails with my latest episode. I haven't sent one out yet. I don't believe about PodLab because it's very new. Like I
Mhm.
have an ad running in Pod News this Friday
Right.
from when we're recording. So basically through email and then social media as well, or my podcast episodes, like whatever I'm offering, I might have like a little ad in my podcast as well.
Yeah, so
Mhm.
that makes sense. Yeah, I think that's pretty interesting. And I think that there's definitely, opportunities to tie it all together in
Mhm.
some way. It is hard. I did think at one point that I would, should I stop doing Truth Tastes Funny now that the other stuff is kind of becoming, more business wise, more relevant. And then I realized, no, the human kind of, emotional stuff, that's important. So I think that's a good thing to keep in mind. So let's talk about the vision for podcasting, what you think what you might see in the industry in terms of trends, and any advice that you'd like to leave our audience with, as far as people who are thinking about getting into podcasting, people who are either they've started it maybe and have hit some bumps. Where do you think the industry is going, and what advice do you give people who are out there interested in doing it?
Yeah, so as far as the industry goes, I think one thing is the whole AI thing, which I think just makes podcasting more accessible
Right.
or easier to do or to create, because having AI, helping with show notes, and it's just a time saver. And then also, I think shorter episodes are becoming more popular, whether they're solo or interview. I think solo episodes are becoming more popular, but solo or interview that are like 30 minutes or less, because I started my podcast for like 45 minutes to an hour, but I'm finding that the ones that are 30 minutes or less do a lot better. And I don't know if that's because that's the average commute time or whatever. But so I think shorter episodes, also solo episodes mixed in with your interview episodes, as well as using AI for the post-production. And then as far as like if someone's wanting to get started, or maybe they have, but they're running into roadblocks, I would say, well, first of all, to use AI for your post-production, because it's a big time saver. And then also trying to avoid shiny object syndrome, because I think that's a problem all entrepreneurs have. It's like we see the next thing and we're like, oh, now I got to try that, or now I got to start a business about that. But yeah, just really focus on your one thing, the one thing you're really good at, that people tell you you're good at, that you enjoy, and just stick with it, because podcasting, I guess, like a lot of things, is kind of a long game. Like, for example, I've been doing the podcast for 4 years now, and it was just last week actually that, and this won't happen for every podcast, and this shouldn't be the goal necessarily, but last week it charted in the top 200 for entrepreneurship in the US. It was like 120 something, but that took like 4 years of getting to that point. So yeah, just patience, really.
All right.
If you liked the show,
Yes, and
it worked for you,
yes, that.
subscribe and leave a
Yes, friend.
5-star review.
Yes, friend.
Tell all your friends.
Yes, friend.
Get your branding here.
Yes, friend.
Get your branding here.
Yes, friend.
Did I make it clear?
Yes, friend.
Get your branding on
Yes.
before they're gone.
Yeah. Huh?